All right, welcome everyone. We're just settling the self on the self here as we begin this session. Just a few moments of silence. I'll be inviting the bell. All right, good morning everyone. It's good to see you here. Hi friends. That's what I was thinking when I was seeing you all. And it reminded me that, with a sense of friendliness, we can feel more connected and we're willing. I think there's a sense of willingness to be more connected. And so let us start the session. I'm going to try to hold to my sense of the container that I put out, which I did not do the first time here, I remember. Let's go ahead and start with that. So I'm putting in the chat the refraining, and the not version that we've been using. So you're invited to unmute and chant with me. I will ring a bell at the end of all five. Here we go. I vow not to kill. I vow not to take what is not given. I vow not to misuse sexuality. I vow to refrain from false speech. I vow to refrain from intoxicants. So today, the topic is on onward commitment and support to enacting our values. So I really want to thank all the teachers who have been in this series, myself, of course, and then Reverend Dana Takagi, Reverend Willie Muke Smith, Bruni Davila, and Rahil Rajiani. And Nina will be in the next series. We'll take a week off and then we'll start another series of the 5. So I wanted to kind of bring this around, and I did put commitment first. I said, and my idea is what it takes. How do we need to commit to onward going with this practice of holding the precepts up? And I put some, and then what support do you need? That was my idea when I came up with like this week 6. And as I've been reflecting on this, I thought, oh, well, they're not separate, are they? And they work together. In the commitment, we have support. When we feel supported, we're more willing to commit. Isn't that true? And in a way that, to me, that's one way that we can frame the way practice is. And I do think, and maybe it's just me, rather resistant, perhaps personality to authority, to being told what to do, to engaging, because I want to hold back a little bit, and to life, to situation, or when things are overwhelming, my tendency is to hold back. And so for me, the willingness to engage, to commit to showing up, which and I know in Soto Zen we talk a lot about. If you read the whole web page, there's a part where you commit to, or we ask you to look at the communication agreement, or the EBMC, multicultural communication, I think they call it agreement too. And you see that on top, the first one is try it on. And I like to say it's my lens is Soto Zen or insight. So to me, that's much more of the Soto Zen things, where the willingness to engage wholeheartedly is the beginning, right? Because that's the ask. And so, when we frame the precepts very much in Soto Zen, we study it and then we ask you to take public vows. That's really, as I understand it, what I'm empowered to do when I'm Dharma transmitted, is to teach the precepts and then to be able to offer them publicly. And part of the going through the ceremony, and I have students here who have done that, is that one, the whole study process, and in our tradition, we sew our own rakusus. And the way I do it, it's at least 8 months. And so it's a time in which we really engage in studying the precepts. We engage in what does that mean to not only study them, but live with them, really give ourselves the container to really engage. And to me, that's part of what determines commitment. Am I willing to be in that container? So from here, now that we've talked about the precepts, I did just say we'll take a week off. But it's that sense, isn't it? Okay, well, this hour I just studied the precept. The rest of the 23 hours later, or however many hours, whoever can do the math, until next week, or in 2 weeks in this case, right? I'm outside the container, right? And yet, part of practice is how do we stay committed to not only to holding what we value as important, and to let it guide us, let it be a support. Just even the word guidance, I think it's so hard we feel like it's a kind of giving up power, right? I know in Zen, as I understand it again, and by the way, when I say Zen, I mean Soto Zen for the most part, unless I say otherwise, because that's the lineage I'm in. We say that a relationship that you're building in practice is really important, is the student and teacher relationship. And as I understand it, your teacher is a master. That's right, a Zen master, right? And there is very much a sense of you are giving over some sense of thinking that you know everything about your practice. And you're willing to let someone inform you and guide you how you are in the Sangha, how you are in the world, how you view the world. So it's a commitment. I have a friend in the Shambhala, a lineage of the Vajrayana, and he was telling me that the guru, which, I know very little about, except I just, I, like many of us perhaps, think a guru is like, oh, that's too much. But he said, well, a guru is, when you ask in that lineage, when you ask someone to be a teacher, to be your guru, they are committed to guiding you and your life for all your lifetimes. That's the depth of that commitment. Honestly, some part of me is like, ooh, good thing I'm not in that lineage. What responsibility, for someone else, right? What responsibility? I barely can be responsible for my own lifetimes, right? Or this lifetime. So part of it is, the commitment, though, is that willingness to have some kind of guidance. And I think we can, one, take the Buddha as guidance, right? An example of someone who, the awakening to me is to live life fully. And the precepts support us to live life in a way that keeps us open to what is going on. To me, when a precept had been transgressed, then that's something that I meet in myself that stops me. And really, a lot of time when I transgress is because I'm not willing to look at some difficulty. I think it's the same in organization. When things are not talked about, or when systems have in some way harmful setups or unevenness of power of setup that are not working for the whole or working in a way that works. Authority is important. We can't go through life without authority, right? And when you take on a role like a parent, you cannot be a parent without saying, yes, I will to authority. There's some research that I don't know what generation that would be, but all the parents who raise their kids to be totally like, you have great self-worth, always just affirmation. Now that generation is like really entitled, and there's a sense of not understanding limits. And so it's really complex, I think, this sense of how do we engage that feels both, when do I let go of self-power to let a different kind of power impact me, right? To be guided by perhaps group power. And that's why it's so hard to join Sangha, Some of my students are here, so they know. To me, Sangha practice is the hardest part. Since I still do insight, part of the reason I go do insight retreat is there's not so much sense of power. In Zen, you can't escape power, right? In insight, I can just be myself doing my own thing. In Zen, you can only be yourself so much, but in the Zendo, you got to turn with everyone else. You take, at the monastery, you take your bath with everyone else. So you don't have very little private space. And in Japan, you got no private space at all. All right? So the sense that we have about what is me and what's mine is really difficult or can be difficult if we don't have the flexibility to engage to understand boundaries. That to me is one way that we can understand how the precepts support us. To really practice with boundaries, with a sense of power. The not is what if, that's a very strong sense of authority, right? It gives us a firm boundary to just stop. And then the mindfulness is where, well, what happens when I push the boundary? When a boundary is useful? And then in the sense of the Buddha nature, what is it if it's the sense of boundlessness? How do I practice with the sense of boundlessness? Now, of course, in my samsaric mind, I think it has to be one or the other, right? As opposed to in our lives, it's a negotiation of that. You know, just thinking about what's another sense of boundless power that's in every day. Maybe now that I live in Oakland and I don't know, post-pandemic, downtown is just not so many people. But I was thinking, as I was talking about boundless power, I was thinking it's like if you were in a really busy street and you're getting ready to cross the street when there's so many people, right? When you go into a crowd, in a way, that's like boundless power. How do you negotiate that? Right? And having some self-awareness is of how I engage with that. Because I know I've gone through crowd where I'm like, right? And other times I'm like just flowing with it. And other times, you know, when it's appropriate to stop. There's a light, right? You could say, oh, and I do jaywalk, so obviously I do push it. But the purpose of the light of don't walk is because it's not safe, or you have to be cautious. So it's the same thing with the precepts. The firm stop is to say caution here. In a way, you could say another way of practice is to say, okay, well that light says that, or even if it says do walk. It's really useful sometimes to just still look before you cross, you know, in most cities that's the case. Right? Here in Oakland, like people run stop signs and even stoplights are really fast, and now they've, you know, put in lights or monitors so that people get tickets for that. But then it's used, now there's a discussion of who gets access to those pictures, right? ICE and government agency are trying, so now cities and communities are discussing what is the appropriateness of that. So the other thing is, when I think about commitment, I know sometimes I commit and then I just kind of give up. Not give up like, I think then I can just give up my power and everyone will take care, or that system will take care of me. There's a kind of, you know, I've been teaching the hindrances, and Pema Chodron talks about like sloth and torpor, about laziness, and it's much more about like a sense of how the energy of your life is, or that's one way that I would read it. More like perhaps the paramita of virya, right? Like the energy of how you live your life. And one of them is you just give up. And to me, sometimes for power, I think, okay, here's my power to vote, or here's my power to say, will you be my teacher? And then I just expect them to take care of me. And I know in the, I would say, monastic and temple or the hierarchical sense of when I practice, we kind of give over our power a lot, don't we? And then we get angry when it's not as how we think it is, be it with our teacher or be it with the institution. And so Part of the commitment to me is also, are you willing to engage in it in a systemic way? Of course, of course. Most of us do not have the, I'll just say it, fortune to start groups. We mostly enter groups already in action. And so they come with their own karmic forces, don't they? And so we might engage, and the system isn't supportive of us. And so it's a time to know when certain groups are not, even though perhaps their mission statement say they're supportive in a way that works for all. It's very limited. Right. Bye, Dana. So I'm not saying that it's we have total responsibility for organization or community. And I'm saying, in terms of both commitment and support, it's a mutuality thing. It's a mutuality thing. And I also want to make a point to say, when we're talking about power, when either an individual or an organization has the power and they have done something that is unwholesome, just to go with the Buddhist wording for the most part, right? Then there is a sense, and I want to really make this clear, that as a restoration, whenever misconduct has happened, be it an individual interaction kind of misconduct or an organizational misconduct, if you are in the down power position, I think it is useful to remember yourself and take care of yourself first, right? And in fact, if you're part of the organizational power, then the accountability is for you to take care of the whole first. I think that's important. And here's the thing, when you're willing to accept power and to be a teacher, to be a parent, to be a facilitator, right? Our roles change. To be the friend that's holding someone in need, you have the power. And so your responsibility then is to the container. However, if you're in a relationship in which you're in the down power, the one that needs the support, then the commitment, you could say, the responsibility is to attend to what's here first. And I think that's helpful. Because I know that so much of when things are difficult, we're like, okay, this teaching of not I, am I not supposed to be taking care of myself? Am I supposed to giving myself over to the organization or to the ideals, some ideal I have? The not self there, one way to understand the not self there is, how is it that I disengage from the sense of the self that is the drive. So this is where we need to understand our own sense of what drives us, what, be it the drives for the roles that have been taught to us, and are they, a role we still want to hold? Like in many of our family, where you might be the role of the responsible one when everyone else gets to be irresponsible. You might be the caretaker, even though they're different, maybe as a child you had to care for a parent. And at the time, that's the system that worked, or it had to be, but is that true now? And so it's important. And so there also is the commitment to self-awareness. And so much of the precept practice is about self-awareness. Where is it that when I'm afraid to say no because I want people to like me or to think I'm X kind of person, but I can't, I can't set limits. So I just draw people along in whatever way. And then all of a sudden there's a burst, and then that's where things can fall apart. If you're not willing to be responsible for your limits, you're giving people a false sense that you're able to hold the whole in some ways. So to me, the precepts, how do we take into daily life, does take a commitment to self-awareness, take a commitment to expand the container of self-awareness, not just on the cushion, not just when you're in a group that's studying it, or a class, or at the temple, or at the Sangha, whatever it is. But really to keep on expanding. One of the first Shuso talks I ever heard, it was one of Blanche's, my root teacher. It was Janadraka, her Shuso, one of her talks. And she said, we ordained, she was a priest, to live a transparent life. And I remember thinking, I didn't have any priests, wanting at that point, but I was just more like, what, a transparent life? Oh my goodness, that's hard to do. And if we're saying that I am being guided by the precepts, then in fact we're saying, and again in this tradition as I understand it, taking the public vows is part of the process. Then you're saying, I am opening myself up to be guided by these. And that's something I'm publicly saying. And in a way, then you're saying, hold me accountable. Certainly you're saying that to your teacher, because you asked to take the precepts with them, or at least in our tradition, it's not just, recite them and that's it, right? And in the public setting, it's usually in a Sangha setting, a practitioner. So you're saying, I'm asking for your support also, to hold me accountable and to help me too, right? So accountability and support go together, don't they? I think there's a lot of emphasis on self-responsibility, but I think or accountability, and I think those are important. When individuals don't do that, we need to remind them. And in some ways, the job of a teacher is to remind people of that. And there is collective, of course, and as a practice, right? Individually is both ourselves and the community together. All right. I did want to read this. This is from Bhikkhu Bodhi, the Buddha's teaching on social and communal harmony, an anthology of discourses from the Pali Canon. And here it is. I will say there's a section in section 10, establishing an equitable society. There's a lot here that I could just read on and on or talk about. But I want to say that in some ways, for me, the difficulties of these times that we're in, especially in the United States, is that there's real sense of the power of the country has become centralized really into one person, right? And so there's and in some ways, as we practice the precepts, it is in some ways about individuals, right? How do we practice? So to me, my understanding of the precept is you practice them so that you can be safe for others. People know when they come to you, they are protected because you have taken these vows that you will not kill, you will not lie. And of course, there's complexity there. We've talked about those in these weeks, so I'm not going to go into that today. And, of course, again, the Sangha, when we enter a Sangha, there are commitments that have to do with the precepts. So ideally, the Sangha, yes. And each of us in the Sangha are equally responsible. The Sangha is a group, and the Sanghas are individuals. So, and one way that kind of connects here, because again, there's a lot here that I don't want to, I can't just repeat or go into in this short time, but really here's a section on how a ruler, I was thinking, oh yeah, what about the 10 things a ruler, the Buddha taught that a ruler should be able to, right? And I'll say the 10 virtues of a ruler: giving, virtue, altruism, honesty, kindness, self-control, non-anger, non-violence, patience, uprightness. I know when I had this little thought, okay, usually sometimes I'm very upset about what's out there. And it's okay to be upset. But I think, okay, let's turn this. What if I'm the ruler? Am I willing, if it was up to me, am I willing to be able to follow all these things and practice all these aspects? So here's one that I want to focus on. So what is a monarch, or, really it was monarchies during the Buddha's time, or Bhikkhu Bodhi talks about, when he's talking about this section, is in northern India, and there's actually a lot of discord, but it seemed inevitable that monarchies were kind of really being established there. And so in some ways he's addressing what seems to be inevitable. So this is in a section called the Wheel-Turning Monarch. The Blessed One says, "Monks, even a wheel-turning monarch, a just and righteous king, does not govern his realm without a co-regent." A certain monk, me, you, asks, "But who, Bhante, is the co-regent of the wheel-turning monarch, the just and righteous king?" "It is the Dhamma, the law of righteousness," replied the Blessed One. The wheel-turning monarch, the just and righteous king, relying on the Dhamma, honors the Dhamma, esteeming and respecting it. With the Dhamma as his standard, banner, and sovereign, provides lawful protection, shelter, and safety for his own dependents. They, I'm changing pronouns, provide lawful protection, shelter, and safety for the Khatiyas attending on him, servants, for his army, for the Brahmins and householders, and for the inhabitants of town and countryside, for ascetics and Brahmins, for the beasts and birds, for all, essentially. A wheel-turning monarch, a just and righteous king, who thus provides lawful protection, shelter, and safety for all, is the one who rules by Dhamma only, and that rule cannot be overthrown by any hostile human beings. So if we're guided by the teachings, And it does go over here into about how actually a great king, right? A wheel turning monarch thus speaks thus. This is under how a wheel turning monarch conquers. And by the way, the conqueror here is conquering by spreading the Dharma or spreading the teachings, right? Not conquer. I'm like reading it like he's going to go kill, he's going to go take over, but conquers the world through the Dharma, spreading of the Dharma. Come, great king, welcome, great king, command, great king, advise, great king. The wheel turning monarch speaks thus: you should not destroy life. You should not take what has not been given. You should not engage in sexual misconduct. You should not speak falsehood. You should not drink intoxicants. You should enjoy your accustomed enjoyments. Notice it ends with, and you should enjoy yourself, right? These are not like, right? All right, so we're guided by the Dhamma in the sense of these are the laws, right? Some rules that help us so that we can live in harmony with each other. That's the essence of Sangha. As a factor of harmonizing. How do we harmonize together? All right, thank you for listening. All right, I think we're a little small, or do people want to go into dyad still? I'm open to either. Or the prompts I have was what are you willing to commit to from here? Maybe for 2 weeks if you're going to come back in a couple of weeks to the next session. Make it small chunks. Huh? And then what supports do you need? Those are the 2 prompts. Who votes for, let's close our eyes so you don't feel judged or, overcome by pleasing others here. All right, vote if you want to go into dyads. Okay, vote if you want to stay in the room, have a discussion. Okay, all right. Okay, discussion folks were most, so we'll go with that. Go with group decision here. All right, so then I open it up. How would you answer? Or what is it for you? Should we go around and maybe do that kind of group thing? Or we can do popcorn, but maybe the first one would be, how are you committed to practicing the precepts from here? Or you can choose. Maybe you're like, I need support first before I can commit. Got some yes on that one. Yeah, Nina, please.
I don't have a lot to say, but just for me with these, I just need to remember them. Like I think that's part of my practice is like to continually remember them. Like how do I, like I should really just post them throughout my house, like put them on my phone, put them on my computer, just to remember this is a really good guide for how to approach things, and obviously as we've talked about over the past, the weeks that I've been here and weeks that I haven't, but just the past, 6 weeks, like there's so much nuance and so many different contexts in which, I mean, these can apply everywhere. So it's like, all right, how do you just remember to use them as this helpful framework? Because it's like, okay, we agreed these are helpful. Now just remember to take them into consideration. So for me, it's like, all right, remember. And there were times in my life where it was like, oh yeah, we're going to really remember these. And then other times where it's like, you just forget. These are so good. And I would just forget to apply them. And yet they really come up like every day. I mean, some of these things, if we don't take them like super literally as, you know, I'm going to take what is not given, like that is constantly being negotiated in relationship with, individuals and society. And it's just like, okay, remember, here's a good good thing to ask yourself. So remembering, that's my big theme.
Thank you. Yes, committing to remembering, that might be, a start. Anyone else? Yeah, okay.
I liked the idea that precepts are you're safe for others. You provide safety for others because then there is no separation, really. I mean, how you present yourself in a particular situation or moment, am I help people feeling safe? Am I safe for others? And that for me is very important to keep in mind, constantly, because given the situation, it's easy to forget or dismiss, more than dismiss than forget. And but how to be safe for others, especially at these times. Especially at these times.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I was also thinking about the other part about, okay, what if you are the king, is in a way, then it says, what is my agency, right? What is my agency here? And I think if we place that with safety, I have agency for self-safety, even in unsafe situation, one might be, and I have agency for collective safety. So negotiating those is, all right. Oh, and I will propose that it's not an either or, right? That's our other, tendency, is that dualistic, like it's either my safety or our safety or your safety. But and when is there can be a my safety and your safety? What is that then? Okay, students, we can talk a lot. So what is it you guys need or want? Okay, Yishin.
I'm still reeling from the Cesar Chavez allegation, revelation, and yeah, I feel like through the last month of these precept studies, I feel like my support I need is like when Bruni introduced the Manzanita village precepts. I was like, oh, okay. I feel like these precepts are coming from a place I can rest. I feel seen. I feel like I am a part of it. And I don't feel that way necessarily with all versions of this, because I do feel, especially when we looked at sexuality, it's, there's a patriarchy behind Buddhism. Buddhism was created in patriarchy. It's in there. And so what are the precepts without patriarchy? I don't really want to vow to patriarchy. And life is complicated. Everything's complicated. So I don't need to set up in my mind some paradise or something where there's nothing's touched as innocent. That's not really the way. I mean, I could try, but that doesn't seem fruitful use of my life energy. So the support, I guess, to myself is like, what is consent? What is consensus within these vows? Because they don't just mean one thing. I don't think Buddhists are practicing Buddhism like Buddha. I mean, we just don't live in the same culture. So it's not one thing. it's alive. And I think without that, I'm like today, it's just hard to talk about this after these revelations. And I think vowing to the wrong vow gets us in a situation like a Cesar Chavez, which is not a vow in the end. It's not really supporting safety or these vows. So I think that's where I am. It's a little more and I didn't, I wouldn't have known the beginning where I am now. Sort of think about it along the way, but I think it's, to me, is important because if I do vow, I want to take it seriously. I want to be like, oh, sure, but Buddhism was really patriarchal, but that's okay. Like I think there is, for me at least, some understanding what else is in those phrases, like the Manzanita village set of vows. That's it.
Thank you for bringing that up. I will say the reason I brought up the up power and down power is thinking about that, bringing that in. And I think part of, and in terms of what I talked about, the section about the inevitability of the monarch, I'm not saying it's true now. I'm saying in some ways, how do we talk about what's pertinent now? Like when we're in a system in which self-power is becoming really, really dominant. I mean, we say that about the United States sense of individualism. I mean, that just rolls off our tongue. Like we all accept that. And so on one level, this is the huge display when that becomes centralized as power. And so we do need to address that. So how, individually, we do have power also. We have to remember that, or else we give it away, And yes, the question is, what is the system that we're in which makes it difficult for all of us to be transparent and the system as transparent? That's part of the issue, right? And also we're totally, I totally feel for and understand, having been, a survivor also, right? So, and when we're talking about crystallizing it down, these are the essential, these precepts. And then we, in each generation, in each settings, we can make them personalized. We can make it contextual. I mean, you study the precepts with me, and that's why. What do we start with? I say you write the precepts right away. First meeting, you write the precepts, and for the most part, everyone just writes the ones that they like the most from the 5 whatever offerings I gave you of, right? And then at the end, you have your own nuances for that, what that is, right? So I wonder if part of what you're asking for is to have teachings that are talking more about the nuances in current events.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Okay, well, yeah.
I think the other, maybe it didn't come out. I think the other piece is like, how do the consensus and consent, I think, is a certain way to negotiate power differentials. Vows make sense when they're, or I don't know. To me, they're more alive if there's consent and consensus. Less the, I mean, yeah, I would like to live upright, and I don't think you'd be here if you didn't want to practice that way.
But consent and consensus are not separate. They don't have to be separate. Just like we did, I took the consensus to be the consent of whether we're going to go into dyads or discuss in group. That isn't a misuse of either. You know, we don't have to. We want to be really careful. I hear what you're saying, right? One needs the consent, and one does not need to take vows because the consensus says so. And that's where we can say, well, then this organization or this community doesn't work for me, right? And then, or if you're in that community and there is no way, you're not willing to step out of it, or you can't for whatever circumstance, like right now, you know, probably a lot of us want to leave the United States, but there are reasons why we don't. And so once we're here, what are we going to do what are we consenting? In some ways, that's what I'm always asking. What am I willing to consent to work for the collective, right? Whether there's consensus or not. Sometimes we're waiting for consensus, and we think consensus will change everything, but consensus won't necessarily change something. You know, like we have that sense, you know, for a while, it was going around last year, 3.5% of the population, if we resist, then things will change, right? But will it change towards the way we want? That's the question. There's certainly enough forces, you know, like the Arab Spring. There's certainly enough forces of people and things change, but it actually got worse for many of those countries. So I don't think it's an exclusive thing, one or the other. So what I'm saying today is that we need to be aware of power differential. We need to be aware of individual agency and collective agency, and that individual agency is part of collective agency. If we want something to be different, we do need to engage in ways, and we need to do it in a way that, in the way we do it, will determine how we want the collective. Personal responsibility is just as important as collective responsibility. Does that answer it? I mean,
I can't articulate it quite well, but
okay.
That's useful.
I can hear that, you know, it's meaningful, and I'm honestly, I was blown away, and I feel so sad for the movement. But I will say I was listening to Women Against Rape. I apologize, I can't remember the director right now. But she said we have to remember that that's a collective movement. While they have a symbolic person in Cesar Chavez, the movement continues. And so how do we support the movement, right? This is where we need to really understand both where is it we give into certain dynamics and our responsibility in that. And one is, I think, given time and place and support, without a doubt. I'm so glad that the survivors are able to say something now. And hopefully from this, things will change. You know, and at the same time, it doesn't diminish the work of the collective. And so we also need to, like, it's not an either or kind of setup. I want us to be really careful about either or setup. And so part of it is, how do we take care of our grief? That's something I hold so dear, right? A symbolic person that I hold so dear. Because I have to remember, one, it's also the collective that's done so much, right? Mioshin, did I see your hand earlier? And I'm also aware of the time.
Oh, yeah. Um, when you ask how we're going to commit or what we're going to commit, our 6-day session starts on Sunday, so that question's already answered for me. It's not in my hands anymore. But Jishin, as you were
No,
talking,
no, no, it's in your hand.
it is my
Have
hands.
you heard nothing I said today? Have you heard nothing I said
It
today?
was my decision to commit to it though, and it's easier.
No, it's your every moment, every moment. You could say, "Oh, I'm being supported by being in sesshin. I'm glad that I'm going to get the support container." But every moment, trust me, every moment, even when we're silent, we can lie.
Yeah.
We can take what is not given from ourselves, And so that, yeah, no, sorry to cut you off. I'm your teacher,
That's all
so
right.
I'm your teacher, so I'm
I
just gonna
guess
go.
you can do that. I mean, I think what I meant was that I'm already getting support. That's what Sesshin is, so everybody's working and peeling and cleaning and, making it possible for everybody else to sit. I'm not usually on a work crew, but I'm going to be on a work crew because there's not enough people here so that everybody can just sit. It's not possible right now. Um, So that's the support, and I'm glad I have it. And I just wanted to add one thing about what you were saying, Jushin. Juno
Whoa,
Diaz.
wait. Does Jasheen want you to add to it? It's one thing when the
Yeah,
teacher
yeah,
adds. Okay,
yeah.
okay. I see a nod. All right. She said yes, so
Oh,
said yes.
um, uh, do you remember Juno Diaz? He was a author who won the MacArthur Award. He taught at MIT. And shortly after, he was accused by like dozens of women. He talked about his own sexual abuse as a child. And it was such a moment of confusion, I think, for everybody. And I think the women in particular were like, wow, he has managed to steal the attention again. Like, how is this possible? He's just a, you know, black hole of need for people to focus on him. So this is not to say Cesar Chavez had any good reason for doing this at all, but I am increasingly aware of the karma that causes this kind of thing to happen. He was not safe. He didn't have any. The people around him had no capacity. Anyway, thank you all.
Yeah, so thank you. This has been a rich discussion. All right. Okay. All right. I would like us, this is my format. You're welcome to follow it. Okay. Well, I was going to do just the affirming version, but shall we do the Manzanita version? Let's see if I can pull it up quickly enough. If people want to stay for it, I have it here. Precept series, Manzanita. All right. I have it in the, wait, let's see if I have it in the English and Spanish. That might be too big to look at. Here it is. Okay. All right, here we go. I'm going to screen share. You're welcome to unmute and all right, I'm going to move this box so I can see it. All right. Okay, here we go. Ring the bell. Aware of the violence in the
Violence in the
world
world
and of the
and the
power of
power of
nonviolent
nonviolent
resistance,
resistance.
I stand in
I
the
stand in the
presence of the
presence of
ancestors,
ancestors,
the
the
earth,
earth,
future
and future
generations,
generations,
vow to
and
cultivate
vow to
compassion
cultivate
that
compassion that
seeks
seeks
to
to
protect
protect
every
every living
living
being.
being. Aware of the
The
poverty
poverty
and
and
greed in the
greed in the
world,
world,
the
and of the
intrinsic
intrinsic
abundance of
abundance of
the
the
earth,
earth.
I
I
stand
stand in the
in the
presence of
presence
the
of
ancestors,
the
the
earth,
earth, and future
future generations,
generations, and vow
vow
to
to
cultivate the simplicity,
cultivate
gratitude, and
gratitude
generosity that have no limits.
and limits. Aware of
Aware
the
of the
abuse
abuse
and
and
lovelessness in
lovelessness
the
of the
world,
world.
the
The
healing
healing
that
is
is
both
made
possible
possible when we open
open
to
to
love.
love.
I
I
stand
stand
in the
in the
presence of the
presence of the
ancestors of
ancestors,
the
the
earth,
earth, and
future
future
generations,
generations,
and vow
now
to
to
cultivate
cultivate
respect
respect
for
for
the
the
beauty
beauty
and
and
the
erotic
power
power of
of
our
our bodies.
bodies.
aware
aware of the falsehood and deception in the world, and of the power of living and speaking the truth. I stand in the presence of the ancestors, the earth, and future generations, and vow to cultivate the ability to listen and clarity and an integrity in all, communicate by words and actions.
aware
Aware of the contamination and desecration of the world, and of my responsibility for life as it manifests through me. Stand in the presence of the ancestors, the earth, and future generations, and vow to cultivate discernment and care what I take into my body and life.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your participation today and in the series. We'll see you in 2 weeks, I hope. Come on back. Please take good care.
Have a good session, Myoshan. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Yes.